Hello, welcome back to another episode of Inside the Birds with a focus on analytics. I'm Geoff Mosher, and with me, as always, for these shows is our analytics expert, Sam Finkel. And Sam, we are ready to finish off looking at all the position groups on defense with safety. We've done edge, we've done interior line, we've done off-ball linebacker, cornerback, and now safety. And this is another, like we talked about with inside linebacker, where sometimes you see guys just test athletically through the roof, but their production might not be there. Sometimes you see guys with great production who don't test athletically through the roof. You know, a good example of that, who's not going to factor into this, but from an Eagles standpoint, is Reed Blankenship, who didn't go drafted. That's why he won't factor into the charts here. But he was I think, a 5-year starter at Middle Tennessee State. Incredibly productive. Was not very, it didn't blow up the combine, or I don't even know if he was invited to the combine.
I don't think he was.
Right. But he's a player who has overachieved, becoming a starter on a Super Bowl champion defense and a good player in the league because the athleticism isn't required. It's great to have, but it's not required at this position if you're in the right environment.
Yeah, I think there's really two trains of thought, right, in this particular position. People are going to try to develop these superstar athletes and put them at safety.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a minority viewpoint. I think the majority viewpoint is we want a guy that knows the fundamentals, that can produce, and we can count on a very high floor guy.
Right.
And I think that's the majority view, at least right now in the current state of NFL.
Sure. Remember when Kyle Hamilton did not blow it up at the combine and people thought, oh, wow, he ran a slow 40. And the Ravens like, yeah, we'll take him. And we'll take him because he's got great football intelligence. He is a decent athlete. It's not just because he didn't run like a straight line really fast. And, oh, by the way, we can play him at nickel along with safety, and he'll be a versatile move piece for us. I think you're right. That's what teams really value here when they're looking at, especially in modern positionless defenses, they want guys who are smart and can move around and make plays.
Sure. And just for reference, I've just pulled up Kyle Hamilton's results. He was an 88 in production and a 73 in athleticism.
Yeah. So
keep that in mind as we show the charts.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, let's bring up the chart right now for safeties. And this first chart obviously represents this year's class versus the last 4 years of first rounders, correct?
Yes.
All right. So wait, really quickly here, as we see South Carolina's Nick Emmanwori, one of the top athletes and producers, really the only one in the class of the last 4 years who, beats the average projection here. And let's look at the average. So the average athleticism is about an 84, right?
Yep.
And production score is about an 81.
Right.
And Nick Emmanwori, I believe how it's pronounced, is about a 90 in athleticism and an 83, I'm guessing, in production.
Right.
Pretty good.
Pretty great. Yeah, I honestly, we kind of talked about this offline, but we go into this with the, you think who's the top safety? Malachi Starks. There's obviously debate after that, but going in and actually seeing where they chart, it's made me kind of rethink this safety class. I think it might. I mean, look, again, this is just a tool. It shouldn't be the entire part of the analysis, but it is interesting to see what quadrant they come in, especially in the first round. Again, safety is hard to draft in the first round, like linebacker, because it's not valued as much as some of the other positions we've talked about and we're going to talk about.
Right.
But if you're going to, it looks like Emmanwori is the guy you would do.
Sure. Now let's foreshadow a little bit, because right now you're looking at this chart and you're saying, wow, it looks like 75% of these safeties are not first rounders, right? Because they don't measure up to what the average score is for first round picks over the last 4 years. Why don't you foreshadow a little bit? Will this be kinder as we branch this out to top 40 and top 100?
It will be kinder, yeah.
Okay. All right. There's some names on this list that people are like, uh-oh, I like this guy. And right now he's considered quote unquote bust, but maybe like this guy, but don't like him in the first round.
Yeah. And the thing is, again, it's only a bust in reality when it actually busts. Like if you're going to take a guy, that chances are there's a reason he's taken that early, and hopefully they'll be put in a good position to succeed. So
there you go. I also see we have our safety version of Tommy Hill here in the upper left. Tommy Hill was the corner who was like out of Nebraska, for those who may not remember. Zero production, but athleticism through the roof. And we have that version now in Caleb Ransaw, who is obviously I
Shout
think
out Tulane.
out of Tulane. And it looks like he's testing even above Emmanwori from an athletic standpoint.
Yeah. Which
Production,
is very interesting.
not so much, but testing, absolutely there.
But again, like this is a position where you're going to see someone like Emmanwori actually, taken earlier than Ransaw. When if this was edge, you might see Ransaw taken before Emmanwori. If the scores were obviously the same.
100%. Yeah, like wide receiver too. You might see someone who's just like a test through the roof, go higher than someone who's just really productive.
Exactly.
All right, so why don't we now take a look, because it's so funny. I was just about to say it before. I'm like, there's just really not going to be a lot of red dots here because the Eagles just haven't drafted a whole lot of safeties in the last few years. But Sidney Brown was a third-round pick from 3 drafts ago, and you see here, not bad. Obviously his athleticism we know is good, and it's above average over the last 4 years of first-rounders. Not as productive though, but you're talking about a guy they picked in the 3rd round.
Yeah, and the line will be much kinder to him as we keep going down. But obviously, I mean, it's
This
not
is a pretty kind line anyway, because he's a 3rd round pick, and this is a comparison of
course,
first rounders, right?
Of course. The only issue right now is production. The athleticism is already above average.
Right.
But just watch.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's broaden the lens, and we'll look at these guys compared to the last 4 years of top 100 picks. So obviously that makes the score look a little bit more viable. The square starts to get a little more equal in each quadrant. Nick Emmanwori now stands alone still as the safest draft pick. Now, a couple of guys here. Sam, Watts and Malachi Starks. Watts out of Notre Dame. Starks, you mentioned, out of Georgia.
Right. And the thing about them, what's interesting is they fall. I actually feel like the bottom, just the right side of this entire graph is very important for safety.
Mm-hmm.
So anybody that falls on the right side is a good pick at this. And I'm not saying the top left is bad, because again, those are guys you can transform. I'm just saying from the way the NFL actually is today and the majority view on safety, anybody to the right side is a good pick. And so that's where you see Starks and Watts, the guys you'd expect to be at the top, actually start to shine and stand out.
Because again, this is a position where you weigh the production a little bit more than the athletic ability.
Yeah. And again, Starks and Watts don't have bad testing numbers. They were just penalized for other factors, such as size or other drills and things like that.
Right. Watts, I think, is a little on the short end, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, I think you're right.
I can check that really quickly. What he measured up at the combine. No, 6 foot 204 is not bad. 31-inch arms. Yeah, no, maybe I had somebody else in mind. I know there's a safety out there who's a little bit shorter than what you're normally looking for.
Sure.
Starks from Georgia, just to let people know, he's 6'1", 197, a little undersized there, 6'1" though. 31-inch arms and 9.5 hand. 9.5 hands, pretty good.
Yeah, I do think weight factors a lot into this analysis because, and again, this is a completely different position, but Micah Parsons' athleticism score was very low, and it's because he was very heavy for his position. So I do think like the outliers on weight tend to be punished quite a bit on this algorithm in particular.
Right. And one guy, you look at, 3 guys really. Andrew Makuba from Texas, I believe. And Malachi Moore and Sebastian Castro, they're really not far off the production line. And Makuba is not far off the athletic and production line. So he seems like a guy who's, when we widen this lens, it'll be a little bit more favorable.
Yeah, for sure. And I really like all those prospects that you said. I don't think they're bad prospects. I don't think they're busts, even if they're taken in the top 100. But that's just the average that we've seen. And it's hard because we've had a pretty bad safety drafts in the past couple years. Last year's in particular was really, really bad. And so the sample size is very small. And what happens is when you have a small sample size, only the freak athletes are really counted in in the top 100 and even the first round line that probably should have mentioned it there. So what you see is these outliers represent like overrepresenting what the actual average probably should be if we extend it over a longer period of time.
Right.
So you have to factor that in a little bit, especially with the safety position that's been a little bit more volatile.
Right. One thing this chart is also showing, Sam, is the not a lot of distance between a lot of these guys. Whereas when we looked at corners, there was like a clear number of guys that were falling on the way lower left part of the quadrant. These guys, there's a cluster here where they're all kind of, I don't want to say they're all similar, but they test and produce similarly. And again, when we widen it out to all the drafted players over the last 4 years, I think it's going to make the safety class look not so bad, maybe especially compared to last year.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. And I think we'll tease it out a little bit. You'll see.
Yeah. All right. And we'll keep an eye on our Penn State friends here, Jalen Reed and Kevin Winston Jr.
Which,
by the way, Winston missed,
they have the same.
What's that?
They're the same bullet point, by the way.
I was wondering. I was like, is that intentional? But they just happen to have the exact same score and be from the same school. Now, they didn't exactly play because Reed played sort of what they call the lion position, which is sort of a hybrid safety nickel spot. And he wound up having to play that spot when Winston went down. So he was playing nickel. He was playing safety after Winston went down. Winston's a pretty good player. Is he impacted at all by the injury here in –
I think especially for the production standpoint, he would be, yes.
Right.
And maybe it affected his testing. I'm not entirely sure how he's recovered since. So
right. But you can see they're both pretty close to the athletic baseline, just not on the production. But again, you're playing in different defensive production. We like to value it, but you have the context of the defense that you play in has to matter as well. So this is now with Sidney Brown added to the list of the top 100 over the last 4 years, way above the athletic baseline, not too far behind in the production category as well.
And you know what? That kind of gives me a little bit of hope. I liked Sidney Brown. I think I wrote an article and I think I had him on there as like one of the people that should be considered, but I think it was like my fourth choice on there of potential replacements for whatever it was, however many years ago. But I think that might have been like my first article for you guys too.
I think it was. I remember that.
Yeah. And I liked Sidney Brown. But it's hard to replace CJGJ. And I found oftentimes that Sidney Brown seems like kind of a little bit undisciplined. You know, it's hard.
You've noticed that?
Just a little bit.
Bit.
And what you see is that like it's that athletic. It's right. You're trying to develop him into someone that can produce. Right. And I think that's what you kind of can see even in his pro career, that level of production while he's on the field. And again, he wasn't on the field so much last year. But you can kind of see where that production kind of factors in at the next level.
Right. Absolutely. And, they're going to need him to produce this year for the Eagles because he's obviously got to take command of that spot. But I would say he plays the game differently than CJGJ. So, his production is measured differently than the way CJGJ's production is measured. All right, we now look at a chart that shows us any drafted safety over the last 4 years and how it compares. And as that tends to be the case, you have far more guys here on the right side where you say is the most important for this position to be. So now you've got yours, not just Makuba, right, who we said wasn't on this end. Now he is. Yep. Okay, so he looks a little safer. Maybe he's not a first-round pick. Maybe second or third, or we'll see what happens with him. But Malachi Moore, Sebastian Castro, Sanker, Siegel. It makes and look, even the guys who are here in the lower left quadrant start to bump up into the upper left and become gems. So if you can get a Reed or a Winston or a Woodson, RJ Mickens on early day 3 or mid day 3, whatever, you might wind up getting a pretty good value there.
Yeah, and I think this is a fun one because Billy Bowman falls right in the middle almost perfectly. So I got to create a whole new category for him called average, which he probably wouldn't necessarily like that, but it's a compliment, right? You are the average drafted corner or safety. So
that reminds me, there was an old sitcom called News Radio, and Phil Hartman, the great comedian from Saturday Night Live, was in it, and he played this like political commentator. And someone did a write up on him and called him very average, and everybody was really worried about how he was going to react to that. And he came out of his office and he was so happy, and he was showing everybody, and nobody could figure out why he was so happy about being called mediocre and average. And he went on a tangent about, in a world where there's so much incompetence, do you realize how hard it is just to be considered and viewed as mediocre at your job? He's like, that is such a merit badge. And they all kind of like just nodded.
This guy's crazy.
and to the point, there's a lot of busts. There's a lot of guys that don't live up to it. So if you can compare yourself to drafted safeties and say, hey, you're right on the average there for production and athleticism, that means you have a job in the NFL.
Yeah. And that's how I want you to take that, Billy, because you're definitely watching our content. I know it.
Billy Bowman. That's a football player's name, by the way.
100% Hall of Fame name right there, just
now,
by itself.
He's in Oklahoma, and then definitely in Oklahoma. Billy Bowman out of Oklahoma. Yeah. So we like that. We're big fans of Billy Bowman here on Inside the Birds, and we hope he makes it.
Absolutely.
But again, the class of safeties looks pretty good when you broaden the lens here comparatively to the last 4 years of drafted safeties.
Sky Motor Cars in Westchester is a different sort of dealership. All it takes is one look at their Highline pre-owned vehicles that people all over the country want and need. Owner Brett Schulter makes sure you don't spend a dime of your money before you purchase the car. Sky Motor Cars allows you to make all the decisions regarding your next vehicle. At Sky Motor Cars, you never have to spend more than necessary. Visit SkyMotorCars.com today or call 610-918-7225.
I am secretly pulling for my Penn State guys. I think Reed, I think he's pretty decent. He's got good. Again, he's versatile. You can play him in some spots. Winston is a guy I think can wind up being better than what the charts show because he was injured. I mean, if he had played his senior year, some people were talking about him as a potential second-round pick. So
yeah, I love Winston. I think Reed is a little bit more limited.
I
think that I don't know if it's his decision making or if it's his inability to close. And his tackling was like one of the highest in the country, but he's just not great in coverage and open space that consistently, particularly in the red zone. I feel like he was not particularly strong there.
Absolutely. And I think you were right probably about Winston, maybe the injury hurting certain areas of his athletics testing because he's a pretty good athlete, if I recall correctly. So
I think he
a guy who
encompasses gem. Like I think that is the label for him.
Yeah. Because without the injury, he's probably closer to the production average, if not over it, and then higher on the athletic testing side.
Yep.
I'm trying to think, the Eagles, you think of like Grant Calcaterra, who was a 6th-round pick, but he was a pretty productive player at SMU after Oklahoma, but he had retired. He had the concussion injury, but you wind up getting a guy who's better than a 6th-round pick because he would have been more productive, right? And he was a pretty good athlete for his position. He just had the injury issue, the concussions issue.
Yeah, and I think probably the same for Moro Ojomo and some of the other guys.
Right. And to your point, Sidney Brown, when you compare him to all drafted safeties, almost gets completely into the upper right quadrant there.
I will give it to you, Sidney. You crossed the threshold.
Is it like the nose of the football where if you just crossed, you're in the upper right quadrant?
Give me an index card.
Slight part of it that's in the
index card.
Good stuff. And again, look at what it does to the safeties of this group. There's very few who you're just like, stay away from this dude. Even the ones who aren't productive are closer to the athletic average.
Yeah, and I think I gave Lathan Ransom, I think I gave him a grade of fringe because I was like, you can't say that's really not a reason not to draft him.
No, that is true. All right. So good stuff there. We'll go down to just, your gems. Obviously, Emmanwori was so good out of South Carolina that he is the cream of the crop for this podcast. You get more. Is it Marquez Siegel from Kansas State?
Yeah.
Yeah. Catan Crawford, Nevada, Caleb Bransaw, the amazing tester from Tulane. But you get goods here in Xavier Watts and Malachi Starks. I feel like if you can come away with a Watts or a Starks or even a Makuba here on day 2, you're probably doing all right.
Yeah, and again, this is not necessarily an order of their ranking.
Right.
It's just a categorization based on the chart.
Of course.
Because I think it would be crazy not to have Malachi Starks at 1 or 2.
Right. I agree with you. And, to your point, Sanker and Woodson were the high testing guys. So, like, if you're day 2, day 3, and you're like, hey, I'm looking for a great athlete here. I want someone who can run around, help me on special teams. Bang. There you go.
Absolutely. There
All
you go.
That is going to do that's safeties. And
Defense done.
Defense is now in the books. We are going to go and do offense in our next series. And I am bleeding you dry, my friend. I'm just turning out the content from you.
All right, we can do contract stuff again. I'm down. I'm always ready.
We went from contracts to content. All right. Good stuff. All right, Sam, we'll catch up with you again. Thanks so much for all the work and the effort that you put in. For Sam Finkel, I'm Geoff Mosher. You've been watching ITB Inside the Birds from an analytics viewpoint. Catch you on the next one.